The NFL Combine is in the books from the Circle City. So, what storylines stuck out the most during the massive event in Indianapolis? Which ones apply to the Colts? What are the takeaways? And what did you, the fans, think were the biggest discussion points? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast presented by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. I am Drake Wally, deputy editor of the site, co-host of the show. Then, of course, I'm joined by the one and only Noah Gebert, analyst for the site and fellow co-host of the show. Noah, this was, we had a chance to hang out a little bit and kind of like get a little taste of the city. And, one of the things that really stuck out in this combine is just, running backs, tight ends. There's so many storylines every combine there is, but this one specifically, especially because we cover the Colts, there's just really not even a position, even quarterback, man. They need all of these positions, and they need depth where they have starters, or they need starters where they only have depth. I thought that it was a very telling combine, and there's a reason that we have an entire show dedicated to just the storylines.
Yeah, really fun to watch, and with a team like the Colts that have hinged so much in the past on the athletic traits of these prospects. We're paying attention. They're paying a ton of attention to kind of those numbers that they're putting up in these drills that we're going to go over. And yeah, for sure, big. I think just in general for the Colts, this is super intriguing as a draft season, just because they're going into this season with what appears to be so many holes on the roster to fill. And it seems like they've been closer in years past, or we've fooled ourselves into thinking that the Colts are actually a little bit closer to contention in years past than they actually have been. I think a hard dose of reality has set in for the city of Indianapolis, the fans of the Colts, the upper management of the Colts, by all accounts of what Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen have been saying, that they need talent. They need an influx of talent, and really at a lot of positions, and a lot of positions that are strengths in this draft class. I think Chris Ballard mentioned during his meetings with the media, or during his interviews, that strengths that he finds in the draft are like along the defensive line, which they could definitely use some depth, in the secondary, which we all know they need help. The running back room, they need a complementary piece. These are places that he's mentioned that he feels the draft is strong, and places that we as analysts and fans have identified as weak spots on the Colts roster. So it seems like it meshes together really well.
Yeah, and real quick before we even dive into anything, of course we have to highlight the one and only Truett Trussler. Thank you so much for your super chat, man. Cheers to you. And that's a guy that just consistently supports this channel. So thank you again, Truett. And he says the granddaughter plus the parents equals the Wiggles. And that's absolutely that is absolutely true. Trust me, I have a daughter of my own, and when you get them around the grandparents, it's just nothing but good times. And they grow up way too quickly. So enjoy it while you can, Truett. Before we even get started on the show, tell me a little bit about just really the needs for this Colts team. We can pretty much categorize everything. Like everything is really needed, all the way from, you could even probably use more wide receivers, just like you need a tight end more than anything, and safety and corner. Well, you also need offensive line depth, defensive line depth. Overall, coming out of the combine, we'll dive into like what we saw, but what is the state of the Colts roster? Because I know that, we listened to Chris Ballard talk a little bit. We covered that. Shane Steichen talked a little bit. Overall, what's your feel of this roster post-combine, ahead of free agency and ahead of the draft?
Yeah, it's weak is a word that I would pull up. When you start peeling it away at it, you're kind of looking at the roster last season and how things were, and it looks a little bit stronger than it actually is. Because we're dealing with all these contracts that are about to expire in the coming weeks. So just kind of operating under that assumption, the depth chart that I just keep on hand for myself just already has those players whose contracts are about to expire out of the picture. So I'm not thinking so much about those. And I'm really thinking about who's actually on the team right now and in the future plans. And then if you go out and you make those extensions, you can adjust your plans from there. But really just looking at it and how things are, I think wide receiver is really one of the only positions that you feel like you're kind of set at. I think if you have an opportunity to add a difference maker, you can certainly do that. But I think you feel good with the young pieces that you have, and kind of everybody in that group's ascending, and you kind of have that rounded out. But really outside of that, the most important position is quarterback, and you're obviously still not sure what you're doing there. Running back, you've got your workhorse and not much behind that. Tight end, really, you've got an empty room. And then offensive line, you have all those questions. And that's just on the offensive side of the ball. And then you switch to the defense where you've got a new defensive coordinator coming in. So you don't even know if the personnel on your current roster are even going to match up with how the schemes are going to be played in the new defensive system. So your cornerback room, Jalen Jones, Sam Womack, you hope they can adjust to the new scheme. But you kind of have to see that. And you can't really operate under the assumption that everything's going to be fine and dandy there. And then you've got Nick Cross at safety and not much behind him at safety depth. Linebackers, I know there was a lot of disappointment in how that season went for the Colts linebackers based on what the expectations were coming into the season and how things kind of went out. But, I mean, you've got an established starter in Zaire Franklin. No matter how fans feel about him, you've got at least one of those spots locked up, which is honestly a better situation than a lot of other positions on the Colts roster is. And then defensive tackle, you've got your starters but need some depth. And then edge, you just have so many questions with the way things can move. You've got Latu, who you want to hang your hat on, but then you've got Samson Ebukam, whose contract might be coming into question. Taekwon Lewis, same situation. Dio Adangbo is a pending free agent, and Kwity Paye's on the last year, that fifth-year option of that deal. So, I mean, every position is pretty much in flux. And I think wide receiver may be the only one we're not penciling in for an early selection.
Yeah, and real quick to throw my hat in the ring, you're looking at this draft, like if you're 14th overall and, the top guys that you really, really, really want, like let's say that they want a Nick Emenwari, let's say that they want a Malachi Starks or a Will Johnson or a Tyler Warren, and they're gone. I really think it's best player available. I really do. I think that this is going to be a very interesting draft, and the way that things fall in line. Will the Colts trade up? Will they not? It really depends on what they're going to do in upcoming free agency, but that is for a whole nother episode. We are going to jump right into this. So we kind of divvied this up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different categories. And we're going to start with one of my favorites. And this is Kentley Platt, who is a math genius. He's Math Bomb on X, but he is the creator and the mind behind the relative athletic score, which has become one of the biggest things for the combine and what people really judge everything off of. But we're going to jump into some of these RAS headliners, guys that just absolutely tore it up with this. And we're going to start here with Nick Emenwari. Now, there's going to be other guys as well, but Nick Emenwari absolutely shined. And he probably made a case to be the top safety, one of the top defensive players. Was walking into this combine already with that. You're talking about a freakish performance. So, in short, Noah, I know that you put Nick on this list. What were some of your thoughts on his combine performance? Because he really just jumped out of the entire – he basically blew up Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we were expecting him to put up big numbers. I think we did a previous show where we were highlighting some of those defensive prospects we were looking forward to watching. Nick Emenwari's maybe more of that strong safety role that Nick Cross has already kind of filled for you. But I put him on that list because I was excited to see what he was going to do at the combine. He did not disappoint, coming out with that flat 10.0 relative athletic score, most athletic safety. I think Jeremy Chin coming out also hit a 10.0. And I was just looking at some of those numbers. He's 6'3", 220 pounds is what he weighed in at, which is a massive size for a safety, running sub 4.4 at a 4.38 with that 43-inch vertical, which is insane. I think the combine record's 46, so he wasn't that far off of that. And then an 11.6 broad jump. I was reading those numbers, and I misread his broad jump, and I was like, oh, an 11-foot broad jump. That's crazy. I didn't realize it was a whole 6 inches more than what I thought it was going to be. Yeah, no, just mind-blowing numbers from him. I was looking up, just for reference, I was looking up Byron Jones because I remembered he had his crazy jumps during the combine. He jumped a 12'3" broad jump. That was absurd. But that shattered the combine record by 8 inches. So you're thinking of Nick Emenwari's like right up there in the top 5 with combine performances in terms of jumping. And doing it at 6'3", 220 pounds is very impressive.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right here. So he had this is from X. So he's in the 97th percentile of height. He's in the 92nd percentile of weight. Now his vertical 98th percentile, his broad jump 98th percentile, and his 40-yard dash, which by the way was a blistering 4.4 seconds, is in the 94th percentile. This is an absolute monster. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a Chris Ballard guy. 10.00 RAS score. Chris Ballard, I really believe that he looks at the RAS. I think he's got it bookmarked on his laptop. Like, the dude is obsessed with athletes. This guy screams it. Now, I will say something else off of his combine profile that's really interesting. They've got him at a 6.35 prospect grade. That's only behind Xavier Watts. Now, it says he will eventually be a plus starter, but here's something really interesting. His production score, first at the combine. His athleticism score, first at the combine in safeties. And then his total score, first at the combine. I mean, this is a guy that basically dominated every single drill. Now, once we talk about these guys, we're going to finish with, how do you think he fits the Colts?
Yeah, I mean, you just pick a guy like that and you make it work. I don't think you care so much about what Nick Cross is doing or the current state of the roster. I think honestly, this would be better for a team who's completely doing a rebuild, and you can take this athletic person and fit him in and kind of build around him. The Colts kind of need to turn things around a little bit more quickly for the sake of just people's jobs in general. So maybe that's not something they're interested in doing, but definitely an athletic piece that you can plug in anywhere. I think he would kind of fill in that Nick Cross role. Maybe you experiment a little bit, playing him back deep. I mean, he's got that 4.38 speed. He's going to be able to play center field pretty well if he can hone those instincts. I mean, you take him and you make him fit. With a guy that's that athletic, I think you can play him at multiple spots.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, they need a safety that's dominant. They need a safety that has a high potential. So we'll see what happens with him and Worry. But at the end of the day, the dude absolutely dominated the combine.
Mm-hmm.
The next guy is a guy that I think Colts fans would probably you'd see an immediate up in arms if he was drafted by the Colts. But we're going to get to him, and that's very simply Shamar Stewart. All right. Now, I'm looking at Shamar Stewart right here. I mean, you're talking about a 4 point. I mean, I'm looking at the unofficial numbers, I think, here. Yeah. So 4.6, basically a 4.6 40-yard dash, a 2.68 20-yard split, a 1.58 10-yard split. If you look at his so his actual 40-yard dash unofficially on NFL.com is 4.59 seconds. That is absolutely insane. This is a guy who blows off of the line. He's going to make fits for defensive end, or for offensive tackles. He's going to really put a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. So Shamar Stewart really dominated. I mean, it's probably not a guy that's going to be drafted by the Colts, but I thought that if he didn't already have a high draft stock, it just continued to improve. What do you think of Stewart's performance? I thought that he just looked like a very nimble defensive end that's really going to offer a lot.
Yeah, so I think he was listed before he came in at the combine. He was listed around 280 pounds, 6'5", 280. So he was a little bit of a tweener, maybe where you're going to play him, maybe you're going to bump him inside. He's more athletic than the 240-pound defensive ends that you're putting out there. He weighed in at 267, I think, so he's just sub 270, so it was a little smaller than I anticipated. But still, at pushing 270 pounds and doing those numbers, that's crazy. And that's a guy that I think would have some versatility to be able to slide inside on those third downs, on those rushing downs. A guy like Dio Adengbo, if that's somebody that gets a big offer somewhere and he doesn't come back, then you've just got Tyquan Lewis on 1-year deal. I mean, I can picture a scenario where Chris Ballard falls in love with these traits. And we already know he's in love with the position, right? He's always going to take swings at edge rusher. He's going to prioritize defensive line or just trench positions in general. And when you've got a guy this athletic, I mean, if he falls to that 14 spot, which I think could happen. I mean, after a combine like that, you always hesitate to say a guy might fall just because this is going to stick in the heads of all those executives, all those GMs when the draft comes up because it's so soon. But yeah, you could take him and you make it fit. Just like we said with him and Wari, I think that's just kind of a theme with these athletic types where you can figure out how to make that work. You just want a guy with that kind of talent on your team.
Yeah, and actually, Stats Matt here makes a good point. I needed to put some context to it, but he says he didn't give fits to SEC tackles, so NFL tackles, 4.5 sacks in his college career. I basically meant that the potential. I meant like what you can mold this athleticism into. You could give offensive tackles fits. Now it's interesting because Lance Zierlein's breakdown fits exactly what Stats Matt said. His weaknesses: puzzling lack of career production relative to his traits. So like you're talking about probably a technical issue. You're talking about like maybe his fundamentals. You're talking about maybe the things that he's doing on the field are not adding up to the ridiculous athleticism that he's got. Now, we'll have to see what happens, because this is why Colts fans would probably be really upset if
Yeah.
Chris Ballard took him, is because he did not have these ridiculous numbers in college.
Yeah.
So,
It's a little bit
go
the
ahead.
opposite of the Latu pick last year, where you took a guy who was so refined and had that high production. Stewart actually had some pretty good pressure rates in college. It was just he couldn't finish a sack for whatever reason. But I mean, you're just taking this guy not because of his technical prowess, but because of that athletic ability, and maybe having that 1-2 punch of your technical rusher on one end with Latu, and then that just freak athleticism on the other side. I think really could be something to envy for other NFL teams.
Yeah, and something else that StatsMat says here is Malachi Stark's RAS didn't look great, but he was measured the fastest in every single drill. So a lot of things to take away from guys that could potentially fit the Colts. So the last guy that we'll get to here is one of my favorites. He was one of my favorites coming into this, and he's one of my favorites still, and that's Darian Porter. Incredibly raw, does not have a lot of defensive back experience. You figured, though, and even Andrew Moore on our Bleacher Report show mentioned that he figured that he was going to absolutely dominate the combine, and he did. He went out there and really showed his worth. Now, the question is, how much your team's going to take a risk on a guy that hasn't played a whole lot of defensive back? What were your thoughts on Darian Porter? I think he screams Chris Ballard.
Yeah, I think the Colts would love to take a risk on a guy who hasn't played a lot of defensive back. That just seems like what Chris Ballard likes to do. Now, having Lou Anarumo come in, maybe he prefers it seems kind of like he skews more towards veterans anyway, so maybe a raw rookie, even by rookie standards, is a little bit harder for him to swallow. But I mean, you're looking at a guy 6'2", 7'8", so he's essentially 6'3", right around 200 pounds, running a 4.3 flat, which is crazy in itself. But you're just thinking maybe he's a long straight line guy, but no, his agility testing was off the charts too. I mean, it was a 4.04 shuttle and a 6.71 three cone, which are crazy numbers, especially for a gangly guy that's 6'3" running like that. So he's got that change of direction. He's got the fluidity in his hips. He's got the long speed. He's got the long arms. He fits to a T, kind of what Lou Anarumo would be looking for in terms of the athletic ability and what Chris Ballard has drafted in the past at the position. So it's really just a match made in heaven on all sides.
Yeah, I mean, but one of the things is he is a little bit older. I think he's 24. So you're looking at a guy who is going to be coming into the NFL. I don't have his birthday in front of me, but he's going to probably turn 25 during the regular season at some point, and that's pretty old for a rookie. But the thing is, you cannot look away from this prospect just because he had a lack of production. Those wide receiver skills really served him well in ball production as a defensive back. He had 3 years of it at Iowa State, and I mean, he was just simply impressive at the combine. Now, I will say, if you're Chris Ballard and you do want to take a Darian Porter, do you think that he is potentially a first-round talent, or do you think that he sits pretty well in the second round, third round?
I don't think you go with first round, just kind of some of the risks that you laid out with him, of him being the older guy who kind of broke out really late in his college career. I mean, Latu was a little bit of an older rookie also, but he had been productive for years before that previous season. So you worry a little bit about that breakout age. When maybe he was only good because he was 24 playing against 19 and 20-year-olds. But really, those numbers that he's testing shows that he has that athletic ability. You have to hope that the mental side can hold up also, with this being a little bit more complex. I know we got together at the combine with one of those things we threw around about traits that the Colts were looking for in corners is just kind of fast, and they're not so much worried about the mental aspect side of things, like we would maybe expect with a more difficult defense. So maybe that's not as big of a hindrance. But I mean, if you're just basing it off of athletic ability, then yeah, you take him wherever you feel like you're comfortable.
Yeah. So this next, sorry if I'm keeping it down a little bit. Daughter's trying to get put to sleep here, so I think she's right next to my room, and my voice is booming. So this next one we're going to get to here are the running backs. This was one of my favorite positions going into the combine, simply because it's such a deep class. We're talking about arguably one of the best that I've seen in recent memory. I mean, you go all the way from Ashton Jeanty all the way down to, guys like C.J. Harvey and Devin Neal and Byshul Tootin, a lot of different guys here. But we're going to try to kind of go with some of these guys that we not only feel like they showed out to a degree at the combine, but they could fit the Indianapolis Colts, because let's be freaking honest, Noah, they're going to need something with Jonathan Taylor. We go back to what Chris Ballard said. He misses Zach Moss. You know what I mean? So this is an area where they're going to have to address it. But we're going to go ahead and start off with UCF's R.J. Harvey. Now, R.J. Harvey really, I love the way that he interviewed with the media. Very humble guy, a guy that I think is going to make an impact in the NFL. How do you think he performed at the combine, and how do you think that he could potentially fit with the Indianapolis Colts? Because it looks like that Lance Zierlein actually has him as a 5.96 prospect grade, average backup or special teamer.
Yeah.
That sounds like exactly what the Colts need, maybe a little bit higher of a backup.
Yeah, maybe not. It's not the glowing review that you hope for when you're trying to draft a running back, is that they'd be an average backup. But an average backup would be better than what the Colts had last season. So
Exactly.
if you're getting that with a fourth or fifth round pick or wherever you would end up taking R.J. Harvey, then you feel good about that. Maybe you don't immediately throw him into that RB2 spot and you bring in some more competition in form of a veteran. But yeah, I have this written down just based off of what the Colts have gone for in the past. That's why this list was a little bit shorter than what I thought it was going to be when we originally looked at this running back group, because of how deep everybody thinks that this running back class is. And I think there are talented guys that you can find in all rounds of the draft. But really, when I was breaking down these combine numbers, and we're obviously going to get more numbers as pro days come along and those numbers get filled out for some of these other prospects. But just kind of looking at what the Colts have drafted in the past, they've prioritized good speed relative to their size, BMI of 29 or above, which just basically means a little bit stockier. So if you've got a taller running back, you're going to want them to be around 220. Or if they're shorter than like around 200. Then broad and vert, they really prioritize. So broad jumps and vertical jumps, they've got to be in. If you're looking at those RAS cards, the relative athletic score cards, you want to see those in the green, or else the Colts generally aren't considering guys like that. And the same goes with the 10-yard split. So they want long speed, they want explosion. They're not so much prioritizing side to side, like the agility, change of directions, doesn't seem to be as big of a hindrance when they're looking at these guys. So really, I was just kind of looking through all those numbers that these guys posted, and a lot of these running backs didn't do all of the testing, so it's hard to get a full picture of all these guys. But I came up with these four names, and R.J. Harvey was the one that popped out to me first. And he's 5'8", 203. I think he weighed in at great long speed. Yeah, he just fit all of that athletic profile. When you take a look at that and you really condense that down, there wasn't that many that fit. And it obviously it'll get bigger as we go along throughout the season, but he was the one that jumped out to me the most for sure.
Yeah, and CJ Harvey, I mean, if we're talking about his performance here, a 4.4 second 40-yard dash, he had a 1.55, and these are unofficial, but he had a 1.55 second 10-yard split. The guy had a 38 for a vertical. He had it looks like a 10-foot 7-inch broad jump. I mean, this is a guy who is a freak athlete. Now, obviously, that size, the 5'8", the 205 or whatever, that's going to be a little bit of a hindrance. But man, I go back to Nyheim Hines. I go back to that smaller back that isn't necessarily going to be that big of a deal. Like, his size shouldn't really be that big of a deal because the dude he runs straight line. He's got incredible straight line speed. He's got one cut type of ability. And, you're going to look at him and kind of say, okay, maybe the pass blocking might be a little bit off. But you know what? Some of the strengths, relishes the heavy lifting, wears opponents down over time. That's awesome from a smaller running back. Tacklers who come in too high will be bucked from the bowl. That's absolutely awesome. So this is a guy that might be smaller, but he packs a punch. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be something that's going to be very valuable to the Colts. So we're going to go ahead and get to the next guy here. This is a guy that kind of shot out of nowhere. I mean, maybe not out of nowhere, but when you talk about the guys that fit with the Colts, it might not be somebody that we thought of, but that's Omarion Hampton. Mm-hmm. Now, Omarion Hampton, I think he had like a 9 point, I don't have it in front of me, but he had like a 9.5 RAS or higher. I mean, this is a guy that I think we figured would test well, but I mean, he looked like an absolute burner out there. What were your thoughts? Do you think that he could potentially be drafted by Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think this is kind of around that range that you're looking for. We just mentioned R.J. Harvey and how he could be an average backup is kind of what that projection is immediately. This guy, that Lance Zierlein comp, or he says he'll be eventually a plus starter, which maybe you're looking for that heir apparent to Jonathan Taylor's role. I think he fits a little bit more of that power run game that the Colts tend to do, pulling guards, running duo, things like that, isolating in the zones, and not so much. They're not looking for that creative kind of one cut back so much that's trying to make things happen laterally, and just kind of a give and go guy. He can be a workhorse for you. He's definitely that. What, it was right around 6 foot 220. He's the bigger kind of guy that's gonna carry a load for you. Uh, yeah, and then once he breaks free, he's got that speed that he can take it to the house. I think this is, if you're looking for somebody, if Jonathan Taylor goes down, I don't know that he's going to so much supplement or complement Jonathan Taylor's game so much as he'll be able to fill in and lessen that workload on JT.
Well, hey, look, I mean, this is a guy that if he can come in, I mean, there's kind of like stats Matt mentioned, there's a lot of people that think that he might go in like the first round, maybe the top 20, top 25. And I know that when you look on X, I mean, a lot of people are clamoring for this guy to be the top running back taken in the draft, which is crazy to think when you've got Ashton Genty in this draft. But this is a guy that is the complete package. He's a big bruiser style back. Like I know that we saw here in the chat, I think it was Rob Lucio mentioned we need a big bruiser type back. Don't discount, the smaller backs that are able to pass catch out of the backfield. But I think that this would be just a home run hit if he somehow falls to the Colts, which it would probably be. If he falls, it's going to be the second round, or it might be late first. So I don't think that this is a realistic guy to join the Indianapolis Colts. But hey, if he was able to fall to the Colts, that would be fantastic. So then the next one we got is a guy that is very popular. His name's known all around, Quinshon Judkins. Now, he's an absolute monster. I think that you're talking about a guy that's, again, not going to be there when the Colts select him. But what were your thoughts on his performance? I'm pretty sure everyone figured that Judkins was going to go out there and put on a show, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, and I think this is another guy that's very much in the same vein as Omarion Hampton, where he's going to be this kind of a workhorse guy that's going to be excelling on early downs, probably early in his career, which is kind of the role that you have already carved out for Jonathan Taylor. The only time he comes off the field is third down passing situations. That's when you would need somebody to come in. So he's in that same kind of vein where he would more so be kind of that replacement to take a little bit of the workload off Jonathan Taylor, fill in injury time, so you don't have that much of a drop off. And it just really depends on how much the Colts prioritize that over adding someone who's going to be more of that change of pace and that pass catcher or that pass blocker. So yeah, I think definitely could fit, and you could see him be a guy that comes in to be that heir apparent, like we mentioned with Hampton. But yeah, I don't think that he would have an immediate path to some significant playing time with the Colts, which might mean that he's a little bit out of their range.
Yeah, and I'm looking here and on NFL.com, his NFL comparison is Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon is the perfect blend of burst, power, and just awareness, and he's able to read a lot of things out of the backfield. So whoever does get Judkins is going to get one heck of a football player, I'll tell you that. But like Noah said, I just don't think that that's a guy that the Indianapolis Colts are going to be able to get. Now, this last guy, I remember asking him some questions at the Combine. He scored 25 total touchdowns in his last 2 seasons in college, and he gave the credit to his offensive line, which was just awesome that he said that. He didn't talk about any individual skill of his own, but that's Byshul Tootin. Now, this is a guy that, he had some ball security issues, but I had him as a potential fit with the Indianapolis Colts in a piece that I wrote. I personally think that he's going to be available. You're talking about a day 2 pick, probably, maybe even day 3 if somehow, some way he falls in the draft. I think that those ball security issues are going to potentially drop his draft stock. But he showed out at the Combine. He was an absolute burner out there. What are your thoughts on Byshul?
Yeah, no, he's absolutely a burner. I think he was the fastest running back at the Combine, running the 4.32. So if you're looking for somebody, you've got Jonathan Taylor, who's got that explosive element to his game where he can break a home run. I think Tootin can do the same thing for you. It's obviously going to be a different way. It's probably going to be a lot less often than what Jonathan Taylor can do it for you. But if you give him a gap, he can really take that and go. I think he's underrated in pass protection. I think he's willing to do it, and he's like right around 205, I think. So he's not the biggest guy, but he's willing to get in there, and he's scrappy in pass pro. Drops, I think, yeah, we mentioned ball security, just like fumbles and drops in general. He didn't seem to hold on to the ball very well. For a college player, that I don't know or a prospect, I'm not sure if that concerns me that much, especially at running back. At receiver, I'd worry about drops a little bit more. And I think we've mentioned this in other shows. I think the offense that Shane Steichen's run, he rarely kind of sends out that back and on passing routes. It's usually in there as pass protection, or just a last second flat. He's not really running any advanced routes or catching in traffic as the back there, so you're not so much worried about his prolific hands like you would maybe a Naheem Hines, like we mentioned him being a complimentary kind of guy. I don't necessarily think they're looking for that kind of guy, but I think Tootin would be a good change of pace guy, just straight line speed that can add to the game and can come in and be a competent pass protector.
Yeah, and one of the things that really stood out to me was just he's a little bit smaller, but the guy is an absolute. I think it was Kentley Platt actually said, "Yeah, here this is," and I quote. Bishal Tootin is a guy I think actually will move in many rankings because of his testing. I don't think many were expecting this kind of performance. The dude is a pure musket ball athletically, so that means this dude is going to be shot out of a barrel and he's going to go right down the field. He's got that, like you mentioned, that straight line speed. If you miss this guy, which one of the knocks on him is his awareness and really his decision making out of the backfield. He's not the best at finding the lane. But when he does find it, which is what you need in a complimentary back, you don't need a guy to go out there and be an all-star if you're the Colts. If you pick Tootin, you're asking him to basically be what he is. And every now and again, he might make the wrong read, but he is always a home run threat. And to have that in a backup running back with Anthony Richardson as your quarterback, that's a lot. That's a lot for a defense to handle. So those are the running backs, though. I will say that there was one guy that also stood out to me, and it was really because of his interview. Where is he at? Corey Kiner from Cincinnati. That's another guy that really stood out. He's more of a power back. He's kind of a bowling ball down the field. It's really going to be interesting to see if the Colts somehow take him. But this is going to be interesting because there's so many running backs that fit what the Colts need. Yeah. So, but we're going to go ahead and get to my favorite position to talk about. And unfortunately, not many guys that are prolific tested. Guys like Loveland and Warren. That's the tight ends. Who shined? Who disappointed? I'll tell you right now, I remember us sitting, having some drinks after the combine, after we finished, and we were watching these guys test. And it was a little bit underwhelming. Watching some of these guys actually try to do the 40-yard dash, do the gauntlet drill where they're running and catching balls on each side of the body. Tell me a little bit real quick about overall how you felt about the tight ends, and then we'll kind of dive into a couple disappointments and a couple of guys we thought did really well.
Yeah, I think, disappointment's kind of the highlight. Not so much. I mean, obviously there were some struggles with the testing, but obviously there's some disappointment just in people that didn't test at all. You didn't see Tyler Warren. You didn't see Colston Loveland, like you said. Mason Taylor ran the gauntlet, but he didn't do any of those, the 40 or the short shuttle or any of those agility or speed drills. Same with Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, who a lot of Colts fans have liked. Aronde Gadsden, who I really like out of Syracuse. You didn't see any of those numbers either. So just disappointing in terms of lack of information that we got. Obviously, this pro day circuit's going to be pretty important because we all know that tight end position is going to be a huge need for the Colts going into April, because I doubt that they really solve it in free agency. I think they're going to need to add something regardless. So we're going to be watching all these pro days to try to get these numbers, to get that information so we can fill out these profiles and kind of figure out how these guys fit. Because much like the running backs, the Colts have always valued explosiveness with their tight ends, elite speed. And that's just not what we got here at the Combine this year.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and start with the disappointments. Now, one of these has to have an asterisk by it now that we know what we know. And we'll go ahead and start off with it. Gunnar Helm from Texas. All right. So turns out he had a horrible ankle injury, swollen ankle, looked terrible when he took a picture of it. I think that we were like, what is this guy doing? And he ran like a 4.9 40-yard dash. When he had a false start, he hurt his ankle and the dude just kept going. He didn't stop. And then he improved his 40 time after hurting himself, which is just wild. So while it's disappointing, I won't lie. I know that there's disappointment with his combine performance, but with that injury, a lot of respect there. And, I think that there's going to be teams that are going to be looking at this guy like a gritty dude. And honestly, the Colts need a gritty type of tight end. We've all been talking about Tyler Warren's grit. I think you might be looking at a guy like Gunnar Helm despite a disappointing combine performance.
Yeah, and that injury like that's obviously going to affect your testing. Either way, if he was healthy, I don't think he's going to be hitting the kind of those numbers that the Colts have historically looked for in their tight ends. And that injury might have also had something to do with the lackluster performance we saw in the gauntlet when they were going through, where he was way offline. He was hand catching a lot. Rolled ankle shouldn't affect your hands that much, but I'm sure that was in the back of his head that it's painful running on that the whole time. I think that's
Sure.
when you need an agent to give you a phone call while you're on the field and tell you to shut it down. I think that would have, with as many tight ends that weren't out there doing the tests and doing those drills and getting on the field and competing, I think he would have been lost in the shuffle there, and those bad numbers wouldn't stand out if he hadn't put those on the field or on film.
Good point.
So I mean, yeah, we'll see. They said that he's expected to recover fully and participate in all those drills at his pro day. So I think you just kind of throw this one out the window, assume that, or just operate on the assumption that we have no good information on Gunnar Helm out of this combine or out of the combine, and we'll just see if anything changes during the pro day.
Yeah, and then the other guy, we got to get to it. Now, he really didn't have the bad combine that everybody thought he did just based off of how he ran some certain things. And his size doesn't help his RAS score at all.
Yeah.
But that's Harold Fannin Jr. Okay, so we were thinking, okay, he looked a little stiff on tape. I thought that he could be a fit for the Colts just because of the way that he's able to sort of manipulate coverage. But I will say that Harold Fannin, so his 40-yard dash was a 4.71. Now, these are unofficial, of course, but a 4.71. 20-yard split was a 2.72 second. But what sticks out to me is his 1.5 second 10-yard split, which tells me that in the first 10 yards, this dude is way quicker than what you're going to expect. An 8.43 RAS score unofficial. But really, overall, I mean, even during the gauntlet, the guy couldn't keep his feet straight. He was kind of like weaving in and out. He was catching balls really stiff. And then when he got to the sideline, he almost had to like stop himself entirely and then replant that foot and cut up field. What were your thoughts on Harold Fannin? I know that he's close to, he's from your alma mater, but this is a guy that really had to come into the combine and show some pretty damn good numbers. And while they're good, they're not pretty damn good.
Yeah, I think despite him being as productive as he was in college, one of the best tight ends in the country, put up absurd numbers for a tight end on that shortened college season. He looks inexperienced is what he does. He looks less polished than these other tight end prospects. So you were kind of hoping that athleticism would show up in the numbers. You did mention that 10-yard split of a 1.56 is pretty in line with other tight ends and how you would expect them to run and kind of what the Colts would prioritize. He didn't have that long speed, running just over a 4.7, which is something, you would expect a way better number for somebody who's measured at 241. So yeah, you're operating on film. You're obviously taking a risk. I think there's some pretty big boom bust potential just based off of what we saw early in the Senior Bowl with him and him struggling to adapt there. Did get a little bit better throughout the week, but then you saw some other discipline issues or technique issues while those drills were going on during the combine. So you think that's going to be a recurring theme, and maybe if you're drafting him, you're not expecting him to be as big of a producer as you would maybe like in year one, and you can hope you can kind of groom him into being a more of a well-rounded tight end.
Yeah, and you know what? We'll go ahead and because I didn't even realize we're almost at 40 minutes. Holy cow! So we'll go ahead and get to some of the guys that might fit the Colts, and then some guys that didn't test, but we might be looking at them being future Colts. And actually, real quick before we do, I looked at Harold Fannin Jr.'s comp, and that's Juwan Johnson, who I said the Colts might actually sign. So that's pretty interesting. But a couple guys, I believe it's Fedone the second, and then Terrence Ferguson. Are they fits? The way that they performed at the combine, I think that they threw their name into the hat of potentially being fits for the Colts.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a few names that stick out more than them. But what were your thoughts on them? I think that, again, in a loaded tight end class, when you didn't have the top guys and some of the intriguing prospects test necessarily, this is when you had your time to shine and add your name to that long list, and I think these guys did.
Yeah, it was a chance for these guys without those top guys testing on the field to really show out. Maybe Fedoni and Ferguson wouldn't be the highest testers if all the guys had gone out there and run the 40 and run the short shuttle and all that. But they had an opportunity to stand out, and they did. Just really looking historically at what the Colts have taken at tight end, these were really the only two names that I could come up with that would kind of fit the profile that they've taken in the past. That long speed, that height weight ratio that they have, and then the 10-yard split for broad. They always seem like they value those explosion metrics on pretty much any position that they're drafting, and those were really the only two that stood out. So yeah, we missed out on some of those top guys, but I'm happy that we got to add Fedoni and Ferguson as a list of potential targets, at least in my head going forward for the Colts at tight end.
Yeah, and really brief, the guys that didn't test, but one guy in particular I was incredibly blown away by his gauntlet, and that's Mason Taylor and Elijah Arroyo. So those are a couple guys that have been named as potential fits for the Colts. Now, Mason
Yep.
Taylor, man, oh man, that's going to be a guy that's going to be intriguing because that might be the type of talent where you pass on Tyler Warren and you go and you get a guy in the second, third round. So we'll have to see there, but we're going to go ahead and jump right into the next one here because we got to move along. QB fits for the Colts. This one's always fun.
Yeah.
So there's a couple guys that I had. I actually wrote a piece on this. The first one that I had is Will Howard. Now, Will Howard was never going to be a top pick. He was never going to be a first rounder, not even a second rounder. Okay, but I think that he could compete with Anthony Richardson. I think that he could give him exactly what the Colts are looking for. But the problem is he looked pretty bad at his combine. And I know that Shador Sanders put out a tweet that said, well, he's not throwing to anybody he knows.
Yeah.
None of the quarterbacks are throwing to anybody that they know. And Will Howard really, he did not look very good. Do you think that he could potentially be an Indianapolis Colt? I think that, honestly, his performance is going to drop his draft stock, even maybe out of position for where the Colts might pick a quarterback.
Yeah, and I know Anthony Richardson was the selection at the fourth overall pick, but other than that, I don't think we really have enough information to know how Chris Ballard feels and how Shane Steichen feel about the kind of quarterback that they would want. So really, I think everybody's on the table. There were obviously some guys that I thought put up pretty good numbers in terms of like being an all-around athlete that could maybe handle that RPO game or the QB run game, so you wouldn't have to drastically change the offense if you went with them. Tyler Shook, Brady Cook, like how those names rhyme, but those were the only two quarterbacks that really had that RAS over 9 that I thought showed that athletic ability. Jalen Milroe has that in his back pocket too. And just throwing out Jalen Milroe, I think you have Jackson Dart's name on the list to talk about too. I think Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe seemed like they were the most accurate throwers when they were out there running or doing those drills, but I don't really think either of them did enough to separate themselves enough to be like the head of that QB3 conversation that I think it's Cam Ward, it's Shador Sanders, and then nobody knows. So I don't think anybody really separated themselves here at the Combine with the opportunities that they had there. But yeah, just wanted to consider. I think everybody's really on the board for the Colts, and I'm on record as being they could go so bold as drafting somebody day 2. So really, even those guys higher up on the list maybe are in play for them.
Yeah, and another guy that you can't deny because he had a formal meeting with the Colts, and I remember writing this piece at the Combine when it broke. That's Quinn Ewers. Very brief here. I know that the notion that's going around about this kid, but the guy is an absolute leader of men. Okay, he gets guys to buy into what he's doing, and I think that he's got some undervalued potential. So that's a name. I'm telling you, the Colts formally met with the guy. Okay, so that's a guy that might be on their radar, but we're going to go ahead and just kind of barrel right through this. We're going to talk about the cornerbacks. All right, this one's huge. So there was multiple guys that lit it up, that looked good, that were fast as hell, and guys that might be able to be fits for the Colts. Now, this is one where you can go down a rabbit hole with this one because you can talk about your day, you can talk about your first rounders, your day 2s, your day 3s. There's a lot of ways the Colts could do this, and you don't forget, 2 years ago, they triple dipped in the draft. Mm-hmm. So what were your thoughts on the cornerback class? I thought that especially the guys that we're going to talk about, not only do I think that the Colts could take them, but they had some pretty good combine numbers as well.
Yeah, I mean, they're the top athletes at the draft this year were definitely the DBs showing out. You've got Nick Emenwari. We've obviously talked about Darian Porter. We've obviously talked about Maxwell Hairston, the corner out of Kentucky, led the way with that 4.28 in the 40, I think it was, which was blazing fast. He's maybe on the shorter side for what Chris Ballard and Lou Anarumo would historically like. So we'll see if that is a mold that they are willing to break for somebody with that kind of athletic ability. But yeah, I mean, DBs is obviously going to be a position that we're paying attention to all throughout March and April, and this was no different. They really put on a show here, and there's plenty of fits that the Colts could find throughout any level of the draft.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of hammer through these. The first one's Maxwell Hairston. So yeah, he's a little bit smaller. He's about 5'11", about 183, 185 pounds. But my God, man, he dominated the vertical, the broad, the 40-yard dash, the 20-yard split, the 10-yard split. I mean, he honestly looked pretty crisp,
Yeah.
and I think that this is a guy that's going to be in your second or your day two. I personally think that he could become an Indianapolis Colt because the Colts aren't necessarily going to shy away from a shorter guy. They have Kenny Moore, who's a little bit of a smaller guy. Of
Mhm.
course, he's got those long, lanky arms. But I mean, I know that he didn't run the 3-cone, the 20, or the bench press. But what are your thoughts on Maxwell Hairston? I think that he's a guy that fits, outside of the size, he fits everything else, and he's not going to get burned deep.
Yeah, yeah, he's not going to get burnt deep. Maybe running a little bit man coverage or a little bit more man coverage. You prefer that? It's really hard to say. Just being in that first year of Anarumo's defense, what they're going to consider and kind of how those ideal fits at corner kind of mash up because you had Chris Ballard, who has 8 years of experience drafting for this team and for a specific type of defense. Every defensive coordinator that he brought in was essentially running a similar scheme. And then you've got Lou Anarumo, who's going to switch things up more than they've had in the past. So it's going to be hard to tell who's making those concessions, whether it's leaning more towards the history of what Lou Anarumo has liked or what Chris Ballard has liked. Chris Ballard, I think, is on record as not really being a fan of drafting shorter cornerbacks and has to be convinced on those guys. So maybe Anarumo is one of those guys who stands up on the table for a guy like Hairston and really convinces Ballard to make that pick.
Yeah, and we'll have to see about Hairston, but the next guy is Jahdae Barron.
Mhm.
And I know that this is a guy that a lot of people have been talking about. He had great speed grades, especially with the dash, the splits. Of course, his vertical was his broad jump was
Yeah.
He didn't have the agility testing, but I mean, you're looking at a guy who again is a little bit on the shorter side, but just based off of his size for a big nickel corner, he could have that size advantage. But kind of like these weaknesses in Lance Zierlein assessment, he has limited exposure in man coverage.
Mhm.
So that might be something that hurts him. What are your thoughts on Barron? I know that this is a guy that has seemingly been flying up draft boards and flying up rankings, and a lot of people have, felt like he could be an Indianapolis Colt. He's even been mocked to the Colts a couple times.
Yeah, yeah. I think unless we see a drastic improvement in kind of those that mostly the jumps, that vertical just isn't really up to par or up to snuff with what Chris Ballard has drafted in corners before. I think Stats Matt threw in here that his arm length also
It's bad.
29 and a half. I think usually right around 32 is what the Colts are targeting, so that's not really even close to the mark. So if you're missing on that and you're missing on the explosiveness, maybe that's just something that the Colts take you off their board entirely. Colts also value a 3-cone under 7 seconds, and we didn't get those agility testing numbers from Barron, so maybe there's hope yet that he's still around on the board, but pretty much based off of the measurements and less so the performance, I think that he's kind of not so much a target as we would have thought before.
Yeah, and this is a guy that I've actually felt. I mean, he's got I think he's got a 6.33 prospect grade. Now he's coming off of an ACL injury, right? But that's Siobhan Revell. This
Yeah.
is a guy I simply put him on here because I think that he's got Indianapolis Colt written all over him. 6'2". He's got 32 and 5/8 inch arms, and then of course he's got the hand size. He's almost 200 pounds. He's that long, lanky cornerback. So that's a guy. And then of course Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech. That's another guy that I felt like might be an Indianapolis Colts fit. But overall, is there a cornerback that kind of stood out to you that we're not naming? I mean, there's so many. Now, I think that this is a really good class. I thought that most of these guys that were prominent names really showed out. But is there any guy, because I'm trying to think of one because there's so many, that might stand out to you that wasn't talked about enough at the Combine that could potentially be a fit for the Colts?
I think we should be talking about Siobhan Revell more. I know it wasn't the Combine that's not the reason we're going to be talking about him, but I don't think
Sure.
anything that we found out this week is going to disqualify him. The arms were over 32, which they want. I don't think he's going to be doing any testing at his pro day. I don't think he's going to be back fully enough to want to put those numbers on the record and kind of trust in that health that he has. But yeah, I mean, if the medicals check out with Siobhan Revell, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be on the Colts draft board. And this is a guy we've obviously mentioned, but that's Darian Porter, who exactly fits to a T everything. You're going down the check mark or checking every box that they would want in terms of agility, in terms of long speed, in terms of length, in terms of position switching, in terms of being a Senior Bowl guy. He's just all these things that Chris Ballard has liked in the past. It's an obvious name to consider.
Yeah. So what we'll do now is we're going to have to kind of like fire through these a little bit because we're almost at 50 minutes, and we do have at least one of two prominent news and rumors that we might spend about or more minutes on. And that's the offensive line freak. So we'll go ahead and start with a guy that's been mocked to the Colts multiple times, especially by Daniel Jeremiah. And that's Armand Membu from Missouri. So this guy weighs 332 pounds. He ran a 4.91 40-yard dash. He had a 1.74. Keep in mind, that's like just about 0.23 seconds slower than Harold Fannin for a 10-yard split. And the guy ran a 2.85. These are unofficial, but a 20-yard split. Had a great vertical, great broad jump. I mean, his bench was fantastic. Good God Almighty, screams first rounder. If the Colts somehow cut ties with Braden Smith or Will Fries isn't kept, don't be surprised if they try to get a guy like this. I know that that's going to piss some people off, but I mean, Armand Membu, if he wasn't already, high on a lot of people's draft boards, I think this might have bumped him up a little more because he had a great combine.
Yeah, I'll go on the record say I would love the pick of Armand Membu at 14 if the Colts pick him. You've got too much influx on the offensive line. You've got 3 spots up for grabs that he has experience playing outside and inside. I think ideally you're picking a guy that's that athletic at 14. I think you would want to try him at tackle first. He's not really the requisite height that the Colts have gone for in the past. I think all the tackles they've selected have been at least 6'6". I think he was 6'4" and some change. But he has pretty good arm length, and he's just an athletic freak. He's going to be able to get out in those pass pro sets. I would try him first at tackle. If that doesn't work, I don't think you're disappointed because I think he'd be a great guard as well. And maybe you don't need one. It depends on what happens with Will Fries. I think even if you sign Will Fries back, you still want to get Membu and try him out at tackle.
Well, and hey, you know how Ballard feels about guys that can play multiple positions. So the next guy we'll get to is a guy who, honestly, as far as guards, he ranked first on athleticism score, total score for the next gen stats breakdown, and that's Tate Ratledge.
Yeah.
This is a guy that, again, these offensive linemen are freakish, especially the ones we have on this list. This is a dude who ran, again, under a 5-second 40. He had similar measurements to Armand Membu. This is a guy that, I mean, look, this is straight up. If the Colts need a guard somehow, some way, this is a guy that you could potentially go after. I think that it's just going to be interesting to see where he falls, but he's a first rounder. I mean, the guy looks like a first rounder. He had the combine like a first rounder. We'll have to see, but he cross-trained at center too. So this is a guy that not only plays guard, but he can play center. And that's something that, Danny Pinter, they tried to do with, and holy crap, could he not play guard? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on Ratledge? I mean, he really he didn't really miss a beat. He looked just like he did in Georgia and looked like he could dominate in the NFL if he does hit his potential.
Yeah, and probably not something you want to invest that much in if it's just a guy that can only play guard and you're prioritizing bringing back Will Fries. Probably not happen for you. Yeah, and a lot of talk about the mullet at the combine. There was just watching him do those on-field drills. I think we heard one of those sideline reporters say the same line 3 times about how he takes care of it and doesn't put any hairspray in it. But yeah, just a ton going on about Tate Ratledge. He was a star, 9.97 RAS. He could have been in that RAS headliners section we did at the beginning of the show, but we're running tight for time. But yeah, just a guy he would. I mean, yeah, freak athlete. You would take the chance on that. I just think it's a little rich for the Colts blood.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and get to this one real quick because then we're just gonna we had honorable mentions, but we're gonna skip right to news and rumors. But thoughts on trading back and drafting Emanwari and Taylor in round 1 and 2. That sounds great, honestly. It really depends on, because I think Emanwari, I think that there's going to be times, I mean, he's going to need to adjust because while he did test really well at the combine, the NFL is going to be different for him.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that he might have some hard times adjusting to a guy like Lou Anarumo's scheme. I personally think that the Colts might address safety in free agency to a degree. Okay, to a degree. But I also think that they're going to take one. But, man, Mason Taylor, I don't know, man. I think that he looks like a better tight end than I think a lot of people believe. So we'll have to see. But that's going to be interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right to the Colts' latest news and rumors. So the first one is the lesser. and we'll get to the Colts' new salary cap. So the NFL salary cap is now a whopping $279,200,200. So that allows teams more wiggle room. Now, granted, some of these players are getting paid more, so it's really a kind of an offset. But for the Colts, it's now $34,947,239 that they have to spend if they cut guys like Braden Smith, if they cut guys like Samson Ebukam or Raekwon Davis or Tyquan Lewis. You're just going to add to that. Or if you don't cut them at all, that's still a pretty sizable chunk. It's like 17th in the NFL. Not crazy money, but it's also not that bad to have, especially if you have to add talent. Do you think that they're going to spend most of this?
Man, it's hard to say. That you can't really expect to roll over any into next year if you're Chris Ballard, right? Like he's liked to do that in the past, where he keeps some on the book so he can roll it over into next year. Man, you can't feel secure enough to do that at this point. So yeah, I mean, you've got to find ways to spend that money and make this roster as competitive as possible as fast as you can if you're Chris Ballard.
Yeah, and so this last one is huge, and this is what we'll spend the rest of the show talking about, the last 5 minutes or so. And that's that there has been a report that the Colts are interested in certain quarterbacks to bring in. And that is, get ready, people, Trey Lance, who I know Noah has mentioned, and I have too. That's a guy that's going to fight. He's going to try to prove people wrong that his top 5 designation was not, a fluke. Justin Fields, Jacoby Brissett, a.k.a. Jacoby Brisket, as I like to call him. And then you've got Daniel Jones. Okay, any one of these guys I think is a great competitor to push Anthony Richardson. I personally think that 2 guys stand out more. But who are, out of that group, who's the guy that you think that'd be the guy to push Anthony Richardson?
I want to say Trey Lance just because I want it to be I would just like to see him succeed, but I don't think he's going to come in and realistically kind of push him for that spot.
He's your Madden quarterback,
yeah,
right?
He's my Madden quarterback. I would love for that to work out. I love the idea of just kind of this whole thinking throughout the league that you take another shot on these guys who have kind of burned out elsewhere and were former high picks and have this pedigree. Brissett's not so much that guy, but Daniel Jones and Trey Lance are that. And I would very much like to go that way. I think Daniel Jones is my favorite pick here. I know a lot of Colts fans are just going to be completely out on that. Man, there's a lot to discuss when you're talking about trying to add competition for Anthony Richardson, and what does that look like? Zach Hicks from Horseshoe Huddle was mentioning out on Twitter or on X today about how if you're bringing in Daniel Jones and you expect him to actually compete with Anthony Richardson, why don't you just move on from Anthony Richardson at that point? Which I agree with to an extent, but okay, let's play out that scenario. Yeah, okay, you're moving on from Anthony Richardson. What's your best course of action then? If you're not taking a quarterback in the first round, I think it is still Daniel Jones as your best course of action. So being realistic and understanding that Sam Darnold wasn't what he was last year until he was. And Daniel Jones kind of has the same level of production in the past. I think his turnovers are a little bit less, and he offers you a little bit more in the run game, which maybe Shane Steichen can take advantage of. I think odds of him working out and being the franchise guy are super, super low, obviously, with Daniel Jones. But that's going to be the case with everybody that you bring in. It's going to be the case with Trey Lance. It's definitely going to be the case with Jacoby Brissett, who I think would be an awesome mentor to have and would be an awesome backup to have. But you're just accepting that that's what he is. You're not really expecting him to come in and be the guy. We've been there, we've done that. So yeah, I think I would go Daniel Jones as my number 1 in that situation.
Yeah, so my number 1, I mean, I've kind of mentioned this, but I would love to see Justin Fields in a Colts uniform, but the most realistic is Daniel Jones. Mm-hmm. And I see here Yim mentions, I think Brissett's the best option. AR's 2 weaknesses are experience and accuracy, which is what Jacoby is good at, and he won't break the bank. Neither is Daniel Jones. He doesn't get a chance now to make $40 million a year. Okay, he sat behind both, by the way, or he would have sat behind even if he was healthy and they were trying to develop JJ McCarthy. Daniel Jones wasn't gonna play football for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. Okay, like they brought him in just because they felt like, hey, this guy, okay, he needs a team. Maybe he's got something here. Maybe Kevin O'Connell can do with Daniel Jones what they did with Sam Darnold. Daniel Jones also was given basically Saquon Barkley. Okay, like the Giants didn't really do that great of a job. Now, I know that he's definitely not that great of a quarterback. I've hammered on this guy being an absolute joke at times. He looks totally confused and has the wide eyes and just doesn't look like he's even fit to be a starting quarterback. But I'm telling you, he wants to shut people like me up. I guarantee you. So I think that that's the most realistic. They've even expressed, I think, interest more in Daniel Jones. But the other one that stands out to me is Jacoby Brissett, just because of that veteranship. The other three guys are younger. Jacoby started, he sat, he started again, and then he sat. So we'll have to see, man. But we got to get to the end of the show. That is our show, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, though, what we do have to mention here, Noah, and I want you to answer this question in brief, is when it comes to quarterback, do you think that you need more of a mentor, or do you think that you need a guy who's going to be like, look, buddy, Anthony, I'm going to come for your job?
Man, you just need as many shots at the dartboard as you can take. I would be okay with both. I think the highest likelihood you would have of getting somebody who could be the guy is just drafting somebody early. And that's obviously takes a lot of guts to admit fault, right? With the guy that you picked fourth overall. But I mean, they've obviously not been feeling it. They're not super confident if they want to declare it an open competition, even if people say that's just lip service to kind of push AR. There's an essence of truth to it at some point. I mean, they were willing to bench him last season. They're not, with all the jobs that are on the line, you have to go with your best chance regardless of how things have turned up and what you've invested in the guy. And sadly, I think maybe moving on is the best way to go. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think the only way that you could save your job if you're Chris Ballard is for Anthony Richardson to work out. So obviously they're going to do everything that they can to make that happen. But yeah, I think if you're going with highest likelihood of getting your franchise guy, you have to draft a guy.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll go ahead and give Yim this one. Before we end the show, he was asking for this. Can you give me your opinion on trading Mo and a third for Mayer? I'm all for Mo getting traded, but look, Michael Mayer has 48 catches in 2 seasons. They better not trade a third. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, third is rich for a tight end who hasn't produced.
You can call that an absolute fleece.
Yeah. And Mo is not under contract, is he?
Yeah, so Mo's actually a free agent. Let's just say this, would you trade, a skill player, a lower end skill player?
Any tight end in the room, a third rounder, and pick your tight end. Do it.
Give him Will Mallory. Yeah. Give him Will Mallory, but definitely not a third. I would say like maybe at the most a sixth. Because like we said, I mean, Michael Mayer's played 25 games. He's started 20. He has 48 catches for 460 receiving yards and a measly 2 touchdowns. So far, he hasn't been it. So, but that's our show, guys. Thank you so very much. Truett, thank you so much for your super chat. And everybody, NFL Nerd, Yim, Rob. We also had R Webb. We had Stats Matt, the legend himself, third host of the show. Darth Raider, just a badass name. Travis Raider, who might be Darth Raider or his brother or some kind of family member. But all of you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Please like the Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook. Follow Indianapolis Colts on SI.com and on X. It's at Colts on SI. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell if you want to get all the notifications. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to your podcast. And guess what, people? Me and Noah, we're going to be doing our first post-combine mock draft on Thursday, and I cannot wait. We might use a simulator. Maybe we'll come up with something. We'll probably use a simulator because those are just so much fun. But yeah, you know what, guys? We really appreciate it. We'll definitely be seeing you on Thursday. And until then, enjoy the offseason because it's flying by. And before you know it, free agency is starting. The legal tampering period starts in 7 days. And then you're going to turn right around. You're going to have all these signings, these cuts. You're going to have the NFL draft. So enjoy it. And we will be seeing you again to do a mock draft on Thursday night. Take care, people.